So, welcome to the third Webby debate. Today we're going to be talking about the concept of open versus closed. We're going to focus on Google and Apple. Apple has essentially launched the smartphone and tablet industry, but Google has really kind of outdone Apple in terms of mobile devices sold. So the two companies have very different approaches in how they go about it. Some would say they actually have opposite approaches. Some will argue that. And some would say they appear on a collision course. So we're gonna chat about that. And here joining me today, Josh Topolsky, and Josh is the editor-at-large at Engadget, which is a tech blog that covers gadgets, consumer electronics, all things tech. A lot of people are familiar with you guys. So, also Lance Ulanoff, and you are the editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, tech veteran. You've been covering tech 25 years. So, I think in your bio it said wow, since PCs were the size of suitcases. So. I feel we tried to get Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt here, but unfortunately,
you definitely got the next best thing.
You guys are definitely the next best thing.
I want to know who's who in that.
I did go with Steve Jobs last Halloween, so
did
you know.
Did
you really? Yes, I did.
Wow,
absolutely.
I feel like we're in the presence. I know we're in good hands. So, to start off, it's not necessarily a black and white topic. You know, it's something, what is open, what is closed, a lot of people kind of look to define it. So Josh, I want you just to first describe, how would you describe Apple's approach?
So Apple's approach is a very controlling approach, right? It's and this is classic Apple, every piece of their ecosystem, every device that goes out, it all really is by their rules, with their regulations. So you can't, if you're just a random developer, you can't just sell somebody an app somewhere on a website. You've got to use their app store. You've got to use their developer tools. I mean, more recently they've even said, here's the specific kind of tools you can use. We don't want you using third-party stuff to develop apps. Their devices are locked. They're usually carrier locked, at least here in America. They're carrier locked. You can't put another app store on it to have a separate ecosystem. It's all through Apple's gateways, and they're pretty controlling gatekeepers.
All right, and so
the opposite. Allow me to say the opposite.
Yeah, and so they're pretty much closed. Is what you're.
It's an extreme. Well, it's they're certainly closed in that you can't do whatever you want.
Right.
I mean, they have. No, they're very closed. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
they allow. There is a wide range of software for their devices, and obviously their computers are completely open, at least as far as what you can develop for them. You want to debate me on that?
Yeah, right. Well, I want to hear you talk to people would say Google's pretty open. Is Google truly open? How would you describe Google's approach?
Google's not entirely open. I mean, but it's fair enough to say, so at the core of Android, right, you have Linux, an open operating system, right? So that kind of makes it open. But then Google has a lot of control over Android, and it controls who gets to, what goes in, what they'll distribute, which distributors they're going to work with. So they are in some parts open, in some parts closed. They don't have just one marketplace. They have the Android marketplace, but then some of their partners launched their own marketplaces in the way in which they bring apps to the product. And this is where it really gets different. You know, Apple really controls. They are the ultimate gatekeeper. Google's not the gatekeeper at all. They have some very sort of skeletal guidelines. They have the tools that you use, and they tell you to use a good cryptographic key. And then basically you can put the app into one of the marketplaces, or you can put it on your own web server. So they really don't know entirely what's out there. For example, you would find potentially porn in the Android App Store, whereas you're not going to find that with Apple.
Right.
That's very true.
So
I mean,
I don't know if that's like a big problem.
No, but yeah, you touched on a lot of points. I know you've got questions, but you touched on a lot of points there that remind me that it is open. It's open. The Android is not really.
Right. I think it's, this is the problem with labels. When you start to say things like closed versus open, it's very much black and white. We simply don't live in a black and white world.
It's like what you said. It isn't a black or white issue, and it really, especially with Android, is truly not. There's a lot of gray area for both of these guys.
Right. And it has hurt Google. I mean, it has hurt. When Josh gets to talk about the iPhone, it's a singular object, right? I talk about Android phones. It's many phones with a number of different interfaces, right? There's the base Android interface, and then there's the stuff that other people can put on top of it.
Yeah. But Josh, is there an advantage in kind of owning the carrier, if Apple owns the iPhone,
there's a huge advantage. I mean, for Apple, there's a huge advantage because, well, first off, you've got to be, if you're bad at what you do and you make bad products, then all the control in the world, it won't matter. But if you're actually really good at it and you create great experiences, then it can be very, very valuable to own the experience, right? And to have full control over it. And for Apple, they're masters of a great experience.
So I'm about to ask you this. This is what I want to get into. Kind of talking about which is there a better approach? Which is a better approach? Apple essentially is a walled garden. And I want to direct this one to you. If done right, and if this closed approach is done right, can it ultimately just succeed and win?
I mean, there are different levels of succeeding. I mean, I think in a consumer marketplace, it can succeed. For every consumer, it ultimately is, there's going to be places where it breaks down. And we've seen time and time again places where Apple says, you can't put this in the App Store. We don't, we don't want this book with these pictures as an app in the store, and even classic stuff, not hardcore porno, right? Like books that they've done things where it's very questionable. Like you or I might say, I'm not 100%. This is not 100% for me, or I'm not 100% comfortable with this. So the thing is, it can win from an economic standpoint. It obviously can win for Apple. Is there a way to do it where you say we ultimately will review and control everything that goes into this device? Like I think that is the wrong direction. I mean, I think it's a direction you can win doing it, but I think that it is not. It doesn't serve the wide audience. I think but it serves a very wide audience.
What do you think?
Well, obviously, Apple's not winning. Android's the dominant smartphone platform in the US. And that's happened in a relatively short period of time because we had almost a year with Android and a T-Mobile G1, and then we had nothing else. And then we've had an absolute explosion of, like 80 different models, Android phones out there in the marketplace. People are buying them, they're using them, they're excited about them. And, Apple is not ceding control, but it is interesting to me that now they're on two carriers. It makes them a tiny bit more like everyone else. And just because Steve Jobs says he'll never do something, it doesn't really mean anything. He would never build a phone, yet he did build a phone. There are time and time again where he tells us he won't do something till he will. And certainly, as a smart, savvy company, they will have to respond at some point to basically the magic that is happening in the Android world, because I love to use that magical.
Yeah.
There's some big stuff happening there, and you can't ignore it. And Apple has done well by growing, expanding the iPhone into multiple carriers, getting more people into the tent, but it's a closed tent.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that. I mean, Android is winning. I mean, it's a narrow margin right now in terms of the overall devices out in the marketplace and in consumers' hands. But Android is winning, and they've had this huge gain over the last year or so. And one of the reasons is because, I mean, what's weird about this is that it feels like we're watching the Mac and PC race again, where Apple said, our way, our hardware, we're not going to share this with anybody. We're going to do it the way we want to do it, and you've got to like it. And Microsoft said, we'll sell this to anybody. You want to make a computer, you can put it on any computer you want as long as you pay for our license. And what happened is lots of people started making cheap PCs. The prices got driven down. Every consumer could buy one. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but this is so similar with the phone race now, the smartphone race, where you've got Apple with their closed system, their closed device. They're two carriers in America. Not that they have them all over the world, but it's not like Android where, I mean, I could, if I wanted to start a company that sells an Android device, it wouldn't be very difficult.
Right.
And that has really, I mean, that has supercharged the sale of these phones, and it's allowed people to do things like make free or $50 Android phones, where, I mean, Apple's now starting to sell their older phones at lower prices. But
right, I obviously wouldn't suggest that a roadmap for Android success is free or low-price phones, because we know what happened with RIM and Blackberry. They basically gave away so many phones and had big market share, and now we're watching it rapidly decline because they have exciting phones that people wanted out there. Certainly the Android community and the manufacturers that are behind it understand you have to make exciting phones, and that is something they learned from Apple, because Apple made products that were exciting, that people had to have. There was this sex appeal that you could not deny. And when you looked at the first Droid, and you looked at the Evo, and you looked at these giant widescreen high definition devices, that you put in your pocket, people wanted to be near them. They wanted to see them. They wanted to try them out.
Voice? You sound legitimately excited. No, but it's true. It is true. Apple did. It's so funny, but they did kickstart this idea before the iPhone. We never saw big launches for phones. I mean, it was unheard of. I mean, do you remember attending an event? I remember the G1 had a big launch event, and then it just started snowballing. And everybody, whenever they released a phone, they had to have a big event for it. And now it's like you've got these Halo devices. There's huge events. They have, they do in the conferences, and they make a big deal out of it. And that is all Apple's doing. I mean, if you don't make a really sexy device and make a big show of it, you're just everybody else.
But we're kind of ignoring something that's happening. As sexy as all these phones are, and exciting as they are, and the analogy that you made to the old PC world is very interesting, because the same thing is happening. All these phones look alike.
Yeah.
Right.
One after the other. Now, when all the phones look alike and their capabilities become about the same, where does the new battlefront occur? It occurs in the tablet space. And that is, to me, kind of interesting, because that's an area where Android is not entirely making it. And
Right.
Apple sort of is using the same game plan and the same level of control, and at least for now, making it. And this is going to be such an important year for the Android side to succeed and bring out something beyond the zoom that can really capture the imagination of all the users.
And that's a place where you see Apple's control, this closed ecosystem, completely winning. I mean, they are crushing. There is no other competition at this point. I mean, nobody's competing with them at the level that they're at. In terms of tablets, and people who are buying those devices, because they weren't, walking into phones, you need to have a phone, you want to have a phone, and people had seen smartphones before. But a tablet is a completely new class, so you've got the situation where Apple is able to not only give consumers a great product, but they say, this is what the product is like. This is, you've never seen this before, and here's how it works. And so nobody actually is going to be as surprised as they would maybe on a phone or on a computer when they say, well, you can't have this piece of software on there, or you can't have this book on there, or whatever, because it's a completely new frontier for them.
Right.
So I think that's, getting back to the closed versus open conversation, I think it's interesting to see how well Apple's doing and how difficult it is for anybody to really step up and compete with them there.
Well, do you think there will be that point? I know BlackBerry announced it's going to run Android apps on Playbook. Is Google maybe in the next couple of years going to have an advantage as some people catch up to Apple?
They're going to saturate the marketplace, right? There's no question about that. The real question is, what experience are they going to provide? Is it going to be as good as the one that Apple's providing? And as of right now, I don't think we've seen that. I don't think that's been demonstrated.
Right. The experience is still quite different on most tablets. The Zoom, Motorola Zoom with the Honeycomb, which is Android 3.0, is probably the best Android experience on a tablet you can get right now. But then there's all these competing operating systems. Playbook has QNX, HP's Touchpad has their WebOS, which they bought, and they're all different, yet they're all somewhat similar. But yes, Apple's crushing it on the tablet side, but history has proven that it doesn't matter in the technology space if somebody is crushing it. You can get a competitor in there, like Android, in the phone space, we just saw it, who can eat up market share. Apple sold 17 million units, 17 million iPads last year. They've sold probably millions more this year. But it's a massive market. There's so much space. There's probably going to be one or two other imagination-capturing devices out there that do enough and work well enough and give you the ease of use. Google is working right now to sort of get all its ducks in order, all the things in order, so that it can deliver an experience that is sort of holistic and does feel a little bit more, almost, I hate to say it, but Apple-like.
Well, no, but I was just thinking this, that what they're doing now with Honeycomb, which is the third version of Android, and they've made it really specifically for tablets at this point, there's a lot less openness going on there. They seem to be much more controlling about how it looks and how it feels, and the first round of tablets that we've seen are all running stock Honeycomb. So I think it's interesting that they're actually taking...
Let's talk, I just want to talk a little bit about Steve Jobs' argument, that it's not open versus closed, it's fragmented versus integrated. Do you think that Apple is going to be able to own this user experience that you guys have kind of talked about, own it, and even as Google kind of catches up a bit, do you think that in the end it's a closed or a less fragmented approach is really just going to kind of be the winning one?
Well, I hate to say who's going to win or lose. I think we're early in the game. This is like the first 10 feet of a very long race. But I think Google has already recognized They cannot allow the fragmentation to continue. They can't let people run off in 10 different directions because they get diminished returns. They have called people back to the mountain. They have definitely said, look, these are going to be some of the rules. And I think as you see what comes after Honeycomb, what comes after Android 3.0, which is definitely for tablets, you're going to see more and more consistency. Even the way they're now trying to work out how people pay for, like, do in-app purchases sounds extremely Apple-like. So they understand that at some level, when you're dealing with consumers, because that's primarily who's buying this stuff, you have to deliver a certain level of functionality, features of functionality and experience, which I don't actually think is going to be that hard for them to do.
Well, I mean, I think it's they're going to take a page from Apple on this and control it a bit more. I think there has to be, you know, by the time we get to whenever you think we're at the, you know, you said we're what, 10 feet into this race? I mean, when we're at 100 feet or 1,000, we're not going to be talking about smartphones or tablets, are we? I mean, we're going to talk about something else completely, but because it's going to evolve. But as it evolves, I think Google's learning a lesson that it can't just be wildly open, because consumers will expect an experience that is consistent and pleasant. And I mean, with these products, and we're talking about really, you know, some things you could consider a necessity, but we're really talking about luxury items right now. And I think they're discovering that you can't do it the Google way, which is kind of like release it in beta, see what happens. Maybe people will like it, maybe they won't. I mean, they kind of did this with Honeycomb. They only had like 10 apps available, if that, when it came out. But they're learning from Apple that you've got to be more controlling. The question is Apple learning from Google that you've got to be more open? And I do not think that's happening. I don't see that happening in any way.
It's an interesting point. Is there, you know, is Apple too closed? Is Google, can they be too open? I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I think definitely Google's learned they can be too open, and they don't want to deal with, you know, I keep thinking about how Apple is almost like Joe Consumer, and I don't mean that as they're not smart, but they operate in a way, if an average person were going to create the product they wanted, they might look like an Apple product. Google is a little bit more like the backroom nerd. I want to make you something really cool. Look at all the buttons and stuff. And a lot of early Google Android stuff had too much of that. And the whole act of having these operating systems, you know, the fact I can talk to consumers and they go, I got 2.2, I got Android 2.0, when's 2.3 coming? Like, why am I having this conversation? Why are consumers having this conversation? And Google knows that it's not a good conversation for consumers to be having. What they really need to know is that they have a thing that is, my Android phone's the same as your Android phone. It's just an Android phone. It's got a great experience, and really talking less about the platform and more about the things they can do with it. I think that's the thing that Google's probably learned, and that's how they have to adjust a little bit, be a little bit less open, a little bit more controlled.
I mean, I think the real question is what's the damage? You know, who's doing damage right now? I mean, is Apple damaging consumers' experience or developers' experience or writers or artists?
Making people rich. They're making people. I mean,
right. I mean, is there a real like you know, is there a trade-off here about what they will and won't allow? And are they? I mean, they're not breaking the backs of consumers with what they're doing. I mean, it's not as if they're, you know, they said, look, we don't want porn, right? And they said we don't want apps that will defame people and.
But can they take that too far too? I mean, are they taking it too far? Can they take it too far?
I don't think they've taken it too far yet. There have been little instances where they've made huge mistakes. I think there was something we covered where they had a dictionary app and they said you can't have swear words in the dictionary app, and it's like, well, okay, you guys screwed up, and they said, you know what, we were wrong, and they went back and changed it, but.
Well, look at it this way. You have control. That means you can control who can compete with you on your device. And, you know, this is a device that accepts apps, right? But if your app is going to in any way compete with the core services of the product you're delivering, they block it.
Yeah. This is actually a big one.
Right, Google Voice, you know, they block. And this is where Apple can get into trouble. Because if they do something that's deemed anti-competitive, they're going to have problems that are far greater than just with consumers. And I think that Apple, in my opinion, what I see Apple do is push as far as they can until they get a little bit of pushback, and they go, yeah, okay, right, we didn't really mean that.
And they kind of eased up on that. I mean, they used to have this policy that was, if it looks or acts like our native app, one of our native apps, you can't make it, right? So if it looks like a browser, or if it's a mail client, or anything like that. And they've really backed off on that. I mean, you can get lots of different mail clients for it now. You can get, but you can't, what you can't do is, like you can on Android, is say, use this instead of the native client.
Like what could you use instead of FaceTime?
Nothing right now, but that API is open if you want to make a FaceTime app. right?
Well, okay, if you want to make something that plugs into FaceTime or
Yeah.
that maybe skins it,
Right.
but you can't replace it.
Right.
You couldn't do video conferencing on your iPhone through Skype.
No, but not now. But
Over
they're going to do that.
Well, and you know, it's interesting you say that. The reason I think they would do that is pressure. They
Right.
don't want to do it, but they really have to do it. You know, and this is where the argument about Apple being cavalier, you know, way too restrictive. You know, we can't always figure out why they've done the things they've done. And also, you know, to be fair to Apple, they get so many basically applications. You know, so many developers saying, try put this in, and stuff slips through. Weird, bad stuff slips through. So
Yeah.
they're not perfect.
Like the Gay Cure app.
Gay
Right?
Cure, baby shaking. You know, we've had some
A
really
baby shake. I didn't
The
see
baby
the
shaking app didn't bother me that much. It was all, right? It was all in fun.
They
I mean,
had-
you're
they-
shaking a
they-
baby.
they-
What's the
this
big
is like
deal?
a-
I don't have any kids that may have something to do with my
I've had children
attitude.
strong enough who can shake me, but not baby
But
shaking.
you know, with Google, with having, because they have more of an open system, is there more? You're not going to have as much censorship. You're going to have
Yeah.
a lot of, you know.
Maybe.
Well, but they censor too.
But yeah, it's
I mean,
true.
we a while ago, a friend of ours, Michael Gartenberg, who's an analyst and a really smart guy, he found some Nazi themes, like themes for your Android phone that were Nazi themes in the Android market. And I wrote an editorial about it. And I mean, I think it's like, this is something that should be clear. I mean, this doesn't seem appropriate for me in an app store for a smartphone. At that level, I mean, if you want to sell the theme, you can have your own website. I mean, that's fine. But I think in Google's App Store, and they did take the stuff out, and they've removed other things as well. And there's no porn in there either.
To play devil's advocate, you know, if we're saying it's free speech and it's just a store, you know, you walk into a store, there are going to be all kinds of books,
Right.
Books on Satanism, books on, you know, just everything you can imagine. So, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that I know which apps should and shouldn't be in the store, but I do think it's very interesting what we saw with Google. Google is like, oh, they're open, they're free, it's cool, you can have stores here and there, except if they find out that there's malware in some of the apps that have been delivered to your phones, they're going to do something that I've never seen before. They're going to reach all the way to your phone and remove or disable the app. And
You think it's a bad thing? Who wants malware?
you know, I don't, but that shows you something, that it's like they're cool, they're easy, they're open, but you know, they got this little kill switch.
Yeah. Well, you know, your bookstore analogy, I just want to say something. I think it is like okay, yeah, you walk into a bookstore and there's all kinds of stuff in there. But if I run a bookstore, I get to decide what kind of books I sell there, right? Now Google has to decide, and Apple has to decide what kind of books do I want to sell. Do I want to sell Mein
Apple
Kampf?
decides, Google theoretically
maybe you do
doesn't.
want to sell Mein Kampf. But
I don't, but
No, there's nothing wrong with it.
but Apple.
I knew I was going to say you'd say you were a Nazi at some point during this.
Apple decides, but Google doesn't. That's the thing.
But they do. But they do decide.
Well, they decide after the fact.
But they
will
also-
will that decision ultimately, you know, will that decision make one kind of rise above the other?
Well,
I don't think so. I think it's a question for you know, there's so many companies getting into this space, you know, hosting apps. It's a broader question. I don't know really what the right answer is. I do agree with Josh that I like to be protected. I don't want garbage. You know, I'm not going to be able to look in the code and know if there's something bad in the app I just downloaded. I do like to be able to trust. It's actually what I love about the App Store. I'm being very honest here. The reason I like the Apple's App Store is that I don't even think about it.
Yeah.
I don't even imagine for a second I'm going to download something that could potentially harm the device I'm using it on. And I think that is a problem that Google is sort of halfway solving, but needs to solve, and anybody else getting into the space will have to solve.
Well, Google has the best of both worlds, though. They can say, this is our app store. You know, Amazon just opened their own app store for Android devices, right? So anybody can do that. So if I'm the Satanist book guy, I can open the Satanist bookstore app, right? You know, and app store. And you can get those apps. You can download them onto your device. I mean, I think the problem is for Google is at what point does that become a problem for your users when you can just download an app from anywhere? And you actually see some devices now, like AT&T's Android devices, will not let you install an app from another app store. You can't get the you can't get the Amazon App Store on an AT&T device because AT&T says we don't want you to go to some other place to get these things.
At the end of the day, what do customers really care about? I don't think a customer actually goes into the to a store and says, I haven't decided if I want to open or close. I mean, is the experience, they just want one app store they can trust.
Yeah, they just want awesome stuff.
Right, they're going into those stores typically looking for something specific. Maybe they would say, I want a game to waste my time, or I need a calculator, or I need something to help me, find my way around.
A Nazi theme, or a Satanist book.
Nazi, right. The wallpaper, and but they have something specific in mind, so they expect something that's well organized, easy to use, affordable. The game changer, we didn't even talk about, the real game changer here is the whole new business model for client applications, which actually, Apple more or less invented with the App Store. Leaving utilities aside, where there was never one store to get all your utilities.
Yeah.
90 free or 99-cent apps for some pretty significant stuff you could do was a game changer.
Yeah.
And everybody else has kind of followed that model. And now the expectation is whatever app store you go to, whatever marketplace you walk into, you're going to find that variety of apps at that kind of affordable price.
But you hear Android developers complaining that they're not making the same kind of money with their Android stuff as they are in the App Store.
Well, it's exposure.
Sure. Well, it's exposure, but I mean, I just wonder if the appetite is there, if it's the same type of consumer that's looking for.
I believe we've got the same. I actually think that iPhone users and Android users are the exact same people. Because I mean,
have you read comments on Engadget recently? I don't know.
Leave aside the fanboys.
Well, they both have their own weird fanaticism.
That's you've got that on both sides, and I think that is such a distorted view of the real world. Where honestly, my parents have Android phones, and I was stunned. They have Evos.
Really? They like them?
They loved them. They're like so excited. They're like, check it out. They put they open the little thing. They put it up on the table.
Yeah,
like,
are they?
What are you doing with that?
Are they techies? I mean,
no.
are they naturally?
No. My father might be a little bit more techie. My mother really not at all. And it was shocking to me.
I mean, Android can be somewhat complicated as far as actually using it.
Carriers drive a lot of sales. And this is a big difference between Apple and Android, and this is maybe one of the reasons that Android has exploded, that you walk into a carrier and they have this array of phones. They show you variety, as opposed to, one, you get your iPhone from Apple, or you could get it from one carrier. Yeah. Whereas you walk into T-Mobile, you walk into Sprint, and they got the lineup. And they all look gorgeous, and they all look exciting, and a lot of times people think, well, I know the iPhone is good, it kind of looks like that, that's probably good too. Yeah. And that happens a lot.
I think the interesting thing that we haven't touched on is actually carriers' involvement in this close. And I talked about it a little bit with AT&T, but carriers themselves, Google has this weird thing where they are having their cake and eating it too. They say that it's totally open, but carriers take these devices in cahoots with Google essentially, and they lock them down. They put their software on them that you can't get rid of. I mean, Verizon's done this with one of the Samsung devices where it's got Bing instead of Google as a search engine on it. You really can't remove it. And they put crapware on there that people don't want or need, that's just installed and running on the device. And I think it's this weird thing where and I talked to Andy Rubin from Google about this a little bit, it's this weird thing where they want to say, hey, we're totally open and it's free and we're doing what's right for consumers, but actually once they let it go, once they let that one chunk of code go and be handed over to phone makers or carriers, they can do whatever they want with it, and they do whatever they want with it, and that changes the landscape completely.
Right, it creates a little bit of a sort of a wait time between the moment when the first phone shows up with one carrier and then it kind of fans out and everybody gets, and then you see the iterations. It's the exact same phone on a different carrier with a different name, which I see over and over again. But don't forget, Google did try the Apple thing, right? Google tried with the Nexus One. They opened a store, and it was a disaster.
Well, it was like Google's. It was a very beta version of what Apple does.
It was just a disaster, and I think they understood that. Let the people who understand this market, who understand the consumers, drive that part of the conversation. We're just going to make sure that we have the best possible platform and hopefully the most consistent platform, which is something I think is a goal of theirs.
Do you think that there's going to be something that happens the next 5 years? Is there going to be a game changer that might help put one of these on top, or will history repeat itself? And what do you think the future of this market kind of looks like?
Oh, gosh.
Well, I mean, I'll say I think the future looks like, I think smartphones are going to become increasingly like a dumb phone, like a Razor. Everybody's going to have one. They're all going to do about the same thing. They may not be, there's going to be the Halo devices, the Wow devices, but I think that those are going to become commonplace. Everybody's going to have one. But then you've got this new frontier which Lance talked about and I talked about, which is tablets. And in tablets right now, there's a tremendous, it's tremendously unbalanced as far as what's happening. There really isn't competition for Apple. And unless Google and HP and Research in Motion can really find a way to thrill consumers, and I wrote an editorial about this, and about the post-PC world that Apple, which is what Apple calls it. They're competing, they are truly competing in the same way they competed on PCs right now. They're saying, we've got a bigger screen, we've got better specs, we've got better cameras, but the experience is not great. It's not great for consumers. And Apple's saying, hey, who cares about, that's dumb stuff, specs and screens, and here's what you can do on our device. Here's GarageBand on our device. And it's a really, you reviewed, I mean, you've used the iPad too. Did you review it?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time with it.
It's a pretty magical experience. I have to say, like, and I come from a background of producing music, and I expected to be kind of turned off by GarageBand on an iPad.
GarageBand is shocking. Honestly, it is. It really is. It is a very rich app, and again, it's $4.99.
$5, and the experience is, there's nothing in the realm of any other person, any other company that's making these devices that touches on an experience like that.
Right. On the other hand, iMovie is an incredibly dumb movie editing piece of software that they put on the iPad that has so little functionality that it's almost useless.
It's better than the Zoom movie editing software, right?
Well, I'm just saying that if you can shoot movies, I need to be able to split them.
What tablet has the best movie?
Split.
You can't split.
You can't split the movie. You can't.
Okay.
I'm trying to. In any case,
you're totally nerding out. You're totally nerding out on me right now.
One other thing that I did want to bring up that relates to the future of these. You know, I think I'm not sure I'd call them that the phones are going to get dumber. In fact, they're going to get. I know what he means, though, what Josh means, but
I didn't mean they were going to be dumb.
Smart. They're going to be the most important device in our life.
Yeah.
And I think the Aria, which is a smartphone that drops into a laptop, which is more dumb than this phone, is a very interesting concept. I don't know if they've really got it quite right, but this idea that the phone is really where you work, your life, everything lives, and you sort of drop it into different places to do different things. So you're never really fixed on one piece of larger hardware device. I totally agree. Tablets is another separate area that's going to continue to grow and boom. But I think this other thing about how important, phones will not get less important, they'll get more important, even though they're more alike than ever.
And so, and as phones get more important, just to kind of wrap it up, you know, is there going to be one, is Apple going to win, is Google going to win, or is there room for both? Is there going to be one that's going to...
Well, there's room for both, but there's not room for 6, probably. I mean, I think that's really what it's about right now. Right now, it's Apple and Google. RIM is losing market share. Microsoft has yet to re-penetrate the market with the devices they're doing. HP is, I would say, not in the game in any way right now, in any meaningful way. So who's competing? I mean, the question is, who will compete in 5 years? Right now, it looks like it's going to be maybe 2, 3 companies maximum who are...
And you don't see Google or Apple one pushing forward. It's a wild west.
Well, I don't think it'll be 50. I don't think it'll be 50-50 the whole time. I mean, I think that Google will saturate more, and as a result, they will have a bigger market share. But I don't think that market share will be more meaningful. I think that Apple's market share will remain strong, and their devices will be meaningful because they're constantly pushing the industry. Whereas Google is. They're pushing in little increments here and there, but they're also saturated with a lot of sort of middle-of-the-road devices.
Right. It's such a Apple is a sort of singular. It has a few devices and it has a lot of control. Google has a lot of devices on its platform, which does give them sort of this broad. Not as deep saturation. I think Apple goes deeper this way. But there will be, in my opinion, over the next 2 years, another couple of strong competitors that are on different platforms. We won't really know winners or losers for another probably 5 years. But believe me, Google's not killing Apple. Apple's not killing Google. Those companies are going to be riding along, doing different things for a very long time.
Okay, so come clean. What kind of phones do you guys have?
I'm carrying 2 right now. Well, I have a RIM Blackberry Torch. I'm also carrying an iPhone 4. Yeah, I don't really use...
This is going to be, I think it's going to be very funny. I'm using a Motorola Atrix 4G right now, which is an Android device, which I like a lot. And I was using an iPhone 4 before that, and I actually find, for productivity's sake, I get it more done with an Android phone, at least right now. Yeah. We'll see what happens in the next version, because it's always like, what's the next version going to be like, the next OS version for Apple? And we should find out pretty soon in June, I think.
Yeah, so. Well, that's, we think.
We think.
What kind of phone are you using?
We think. I've got an iPhone.
Okay.
I
think it's a bias. It's an older one. Bias moderator here.
You know. And just before we close, I just want to ask you, and what's next for you?
Me?
Yeah. You
mean on a personal note?
What's next for you? You know, you're kind of phasing out, I think, of Engadget. What's next for
well, I love the news business and I love the industry, and I'm not planning on leaving it. So stay tuned, I guess. Stay tuned. Is the best thing to say. Stay tuned. Cool things, I think. Very cool and exciting and interesting things that I can't talk about.
Great. Well, Lance, Josh, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Pleasure.